Well, I had pre-knowledge.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Samaria Herbert, and I'm a programs coordinator for the World Affairs Council of Greater Houston. I'd like to start off tonight by welcoming everyone and sincerely thanking you for being here tonight. To say it's been a crazy year is an understatement for everyone, personally, professionally, and everything in between. So we really appreciate your support at the council, and especially with y'all showing up tonight. We've had a lot of different events, and just seeing everyone's faces has been very helpful for us with our efforts. So yes, moving forward, we do have a couple of more events before we close out the 2021 year. If you go to wachouston.org, you can see those events. We have two next week in particular. On Tuesday, we have an event December 14th in the Woodlands. We're having a holiday extravaganza, so we invite everyone to register online and join us free of charge. On Thursday, we have another event with Congressman Dan Crenshaw. That one does have a fee associated with it, and it's a luncheon that we're hosting at the Four Seasons on Thursday, December 16th. So for tonight, we do have a program on cybersecurity. I will be introducing Mr. Eric Botts. He is our speaker tonight. I do have to say that anything he says tonight are all his views, none of his current or former employers. Now that we got that legal jargon out of the way, Eric C. Botts is the Director of Global Cybersecurity Program and Assistant Professor of International Studies at the University of St. Thomas, teaching courses on cyber warfare, cyber ethics, enterprise cybersecurity, and digital governance. Mr. Botts received his Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science from St. Mary's University and a Master of Security Management degree from the University of Houston downtown. After serving for 31 years in the U.S. Department of State as a Foreign Service Officer, Assistant Director of the Houston Passport Agency, and an Information Systems Security Officer, Mr. Botts retired in 2014. He has worked in the private sector as a security project manager for Swales Co. Inc., specializing in physical security, investigations, due diligence, travel security, digital forensics, and computer crimes.
I'm going to try to constrain myself because when I start talking about this stuff, I'm really passionate about it. And one of the things that I always like to do with these types of presentations, not even presentation, I want to have a conversation with you. So I'm going to throw some questions out to you as well. So how many of you here, either through your personal network or your business network, have had a major cyber incident, a breach, exfiltration of data, Yes. Okay, how many of you are willing to admit that? Okay, so as Samari said, I spent 31 years in the State Department. Now, when you work in the State Department as a Foreign Service officer, you have to have a security clearance. And a few years ago, the agency that handles clearances for State Department employees, mainly all government employees, was, I'll use the word infiltrated. They say hacked. But there was a cyber infiltration of that agency and extracted data of about 2.5 million government employees and their families. This is the database that holds your security clearance. So everything like your medical records, where you live, all your professional contacts, your families, your travel information, all of that was exfiltrated by Chinese Ministry of State Security, and they just took that information, right? Now, so that means my information, there's a good side to this. I figure if the Chinese government has it, it's not probably sitting on the dark web for everybody to get to it, because they probably hold that information very closely. But it underscored for me, because at the time I was doing work as an information system security officer, as well as doing operations work in the Consular Affairs Bureau of Passport Services. It was a huge deal. There was an interagency or multi-agency task force to look at the damage, to do a damage assessment. You've probably heard about this. How many of you heard about this in the news? Right, it's a big deal, right? The damage assessment internally was a lot worse than what you heard, right? A lot worse, because there were other cyber infiltrations that could aggregate that data to make a larger picture. For instance, around the same time this happened, State Department employees were the majority of State Department employees headquartered, Washington, D.C. And when you travel, official travel, you have to use an American flag carrier, right? Fly America. So, in addition to hacking the Office of Personnel Management to get our security clearance information, personal information, they also infiltrated or exfiltrated data from the two main carriers that service government employees, American Airlines and Delta Airlines. Then they exfiltrated data from the contract travel agency that government employees were supposed to use. It's called Sabre. At the time, it was Sabre. So by taking that, you get the individuals, you find out where they work, you find out what level of clearance they have, and then you can look at where they've traveled to. In addition to that, they exfiltrated data from the two Tier 1 and Tier 2 healthcare providers for the government employees' health benefit system, Blue Cross and Anthem. So what do you do with that data? Well, you can see whether or not there's a vulnerability. So I raise all this to say that from that, we had additional training, but I started to think differently about cybersecurity. I started thinking about it more in terms of a new form of warfare rather than just computer hacking. And that's why I will say that I call these data intrusion or security exfiltrations of data. So I started thinking about this in a more broad conceptual framework, and I was thinking about domains of conflict. So, human beings have been doing rather nasty things to one another for a long time, right? And we call it warfare, but I like to call it human-on-human predation. And first form of warfare, or this predation, was on land. Then somebody invented a canoe, and it's almost as soon as they invented a canoe, they figured out a way to paddle out to somebody else's canoe and whack them on the head and take over their canoe. So for centuries, warfare was two-dimensional on the plane of the earth, land or sea. Then in the early part of the 20th century, warfare went three-dimensional, right? So we learned how to fly, and almost immediately after we learned how to fly, we started weaponizing that technical dimension. We extended the third dimension after Sputnik, right? So we move into space. Well, now I would contend that we're in the fifth dimension of warfare, and that fifth domain is cyber. And I like to think of cyber, if you've ever taken it, you can go online and you can look at, you can literally watch in real time cyber attacks launch from country to country. And you can sort of watch this, and then they'll stream the malware variant that's being sent from one place to the other. So you can do this on the internet. It's kind of mesmerizing. You kind of look at it. So if you don't look at it if you want to go to sleep, because you'll spend hours watching this stuff and trying to figure out who's attacking whom and what they're using. I'm not going to go into how they do that, because that would take too much time. But I would say that right now, I make this assertion: we are at war. It's just that the war has not gone kinetic yet. And I say yet. It may not, but all of the tier 1 powers that are using these technologies are preparing the battle space to get an advantage over the other. And I say tier 1 powers, there's basically 3 tier 1 cyber powers. Anyone want to venture a guess who the 3 tier 1 cyber?
United States and China.
There we go. Russia, the United States, and China. There are some very gifted tier 2 powers, and I'll talk about them a little bit later. Israel being one, Iran, and North Korea. And I would put in there also the United Kingdom and the 4 of the 5 Eyes. And the 5 are there's a intelligence sharing community called the 5 Eyes. And it's the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And I would say the other 4 are tier 2 powers to a certain extent, because they often share intelligence and capabilities. They work together quite a bit. I'm not betraying anything that's not open source, okay? So let me just talk a little bit about what I think are some significant events in the history of our current cyber war. Now, we know about Colonial Pipeline. You've heard about that, right? That was and there was what I think is arguably the first iteration of this conflict that really changed the complexion of how we do strategic planning. And that was a cyber attack against Estonia in 2007. Do any of you remember that? Yeah. Okay, so, right. So what happened, very interesting. Estonia, as you know, used to be an Estonia SSR, right? It was part of the Soviet Union. And not only did it leave the Soviet orbit after the wall came down and the Soviet Union collapsed, but it became part of NATO. And we're still hearing about it. Today, President Putin, I like to call him Tsar Putin, and President Biden, in a terse phone exchange, Biden's like, don't you invade, don't you invade. And Putin's like, I want ironclad assurances that NATO will not expand eastward, that Ukraine will not become a NATO country. Well, what he's asking us to do is kind of like Munich in 1938. He wants 2 other countries to decide the fate of the 3rd country. Isn't that up to the Ukrainians to decide? But you get a sense for the sense of grandiosity that Putin has with respect to Russia, that it can dictate the relations of the countries in what they call the near abroad. That's an entitlement that they feel that they had. And that was one of the reasons they went into Georgia. Getting back to Estonia. So in 2007, in Estonia, there was a decision made to move a big bronze statue. It was a statue of a liberating Soviet soldier. And the Estonian government says, we're going to take this thing out of the main square and move it to the cemetery where Soviet soldiers are buried. Move the statue. Now, this caused a great deal of outrage among. Estonia has about a 25% Russian-speaking population, and they felt this was something that was directed at them. So the statue was moved. There were all kinds of threats from Russia. But what they did was something that was completely unexpected by the United States and our NATO partners. They launched what's called a distributed denial of service attack against Estonia's internet, their digital ecosystem. What is that? What's it? We call it a DDoS. And what happened is that the Russian government used a botnet. It's like bot is short for robots, a network of computers that had malware injected that could take the computing power and direct them against certain websites, so you overwhelm that website with requests. They also did something really interesting. They employed the use of patriotic hackers. They went out to, there's a group called the Nashi movement, which means ours in Russian, and they essentially said, if you want to join the attack, here's where you go. You go to the site, you can download the application, and you can lend your computer to support this effort to drown out the computer network in Estonia. It took about a couple of weeks for the Estonians to be able to recover. But what it did is send a shockwave through NATO. So NATO was totally unprepared for this type of scenario. You know, they're prepared for the old kind of stuff, tanks rolling, artillery, planes, right? That's what they trained. They've been trained for this. So the response from NATO was pretty interesting. They decided they have to develop a comprehensive cyber defense strategy. And so they needed to figure out how to do that. NATO needed to train itself because its civilian infrastructure is now the first line of attack rather than military infrastructure. So they created what was called the Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence, CCDCOE. And I would invite you to go online, look at it. And where did they put it? They put it in Tallinn, Estonia. They put the headquarters of this organization in the country that got attacked. So what they do every year is they run simulations, cyber attack simulations, capture the flag. They bring in cyber warfare teams from throughout NATO, and they have about a week-long series of simulations, and then they give away a prize. And I hate to say the United States have never won, come in second a couple of times. The last time I looked, I think the Czech Republic's team won. But anyway, what it is now there's a lot of information sharing. And what the Estonian government did is they basically put their entire country in a secure container. And they developed very robust cyber defenses within the country, but some of those best practices have been rolled out. So, as a result of this effort, a document was created called the Colin Manual. And again, I invite you to read the manual because NATO was still trying to figure out, okay, so we got this Cyber Defense Center of Excellence. We're developing best practices. But what was that? Was that war? I mean, is it a war if nobody gets killed? Legally, how can we respond if we're not exactly sure what that was? Was it espionage? Because espionage, everybody spies on everybody. Espionage, some people are better at it than others. So part of what the Tallinn Manual was an effort by NATO. They brought jurists and legal scholars and policymakers and former government officials, and they worked out this framework to try to understand proportional response and when the response might justify a kinetic response, meaning when to bomb somebody or something. So what they determined, the question is, when is warfare warfare? Can a nation state use kinetic warfare capabilities in the face of a cyber attack? Can you do that legally within the framework of international law? Then there was a question of attribution. Who did it? The old whodunit question. Big deal. Because you can't retaliate if you're not sure exactly who's responsible. And much of the genius of cyber warfare is the the lengths with which a country will go to mask the attack. And I'll talk a little bit about solar winds and how that was done. Can you ever be sure of the origin of an attack? Are there digital fingerprints? What's the appropriate response to a cyber attack? What about the question of proportionality? And what are the possibilities for collateral damage in an ongoing? And I would say we're all collateral damage, all of us. And I'll explain the economic impact of this ongoing cyber war. It is like a huge drag on the global economy, and it's getting more and more persistent, and I believe is having more economic impacts than we're really able to understand, and we don't really have the tools to respond to the economic impacts. More people in the business, cybersecurity, are moving away from this notion that there's a technical solution to all this. And I'll explain why. So let me back up a little bit. So I was looking at all this. It's really interesting stuff, right? I'm reading everything I can get my hands on, and I'm going to conferences, and I'm talking to people, because I'm trying to understand this stuff. I came out of State Department, I understand diplomacy. I understand kinetic warfare and conventional warfare. You can understand a little bit about nuclear strategic policy. Didn't understand any of this stuff. And I'm not really a techie. My wife is better with computers than I am. I mean, I like this stuff and I do what I need to do, but I'm not a real techie, right? I'm a policy woman. So I'm trying to figure out what this all is. So I wanted to figure out, from a geopolitical standpoint, what does this mean? Because we got three, like I said, the three tier one powers: United States, China, and Russia. Right? And of course, if this is a pyramid, we used to be on the top dog. We used to be top, numero uno, undisputed champion, right? Like a heavyweight boxer. We knocked everybody out. We're undisputed champion. Not no more. I would say that it's almost a level playing field, and there's synergies of dominance in certain areas that each one of the three powers has. The fact that Russia and China are getting very chummy should be somewhat worrying to us. And I'll explain how their relationship is evolving through some of this. So I noticed doing my research that there were different targeting strategies between the Russians and the Chinese, and mainly because they come from two different political cultures and they have very different history. So with Russia, there's this concept called hybrid or nonlinear warfare, and one of the chief proponents of that is the chief of staff. And this guy has been chief of staff. You know, we go through these people, joint chiefs of staff. General Valery Gerasimov has been around forever. Almost the whole time Putin's been in power, Gerasimov has been there. And he is the architect of Russian military, its posture, its technology is driven that by his concept of warfare. So what is hybrid warfare? It means that a country employs every aspect of the domains of conflict where they have mastery, or they try to gain mastery. And they look for areas where they can exploit vulnerabilities, but not just on the battlefield. Gerasimov talked a lot about hybrid warfare, seeking to find vulnerabilities within the country, whether it's in their political system, whether it's in their, for instance, their energy, their power grid. Wherever you can find a vulnerability, you exploit it. And there's a second guy. He's a shadowy character, and he comes in and out of Putin's life. He brings him out, and he does some skullduggery, and then he goes away. And his name is Vladislav Surkov. And he hasn't really been in Putin's inner policy circle for a while, but he'll come in and work a special project. And he's a very interesting character. He calls himself a political dramatist. So he uses social media and cyber-enabled capability to stage disinformation campaigns. He was credited sometimes by about doing where he would take rival factions in Russia, and he would use social media to amplify each one against each other and see if it would cause a riot. Just, it was an experiment. What can I do? So he comes in and out, but a lot of those techniques of disinformation are now part of the Russian doctrine. So they combine their military with their intelligence and with what I would call this tier of cyber mercenaries that also work with their intelligence services. So the idea of hybrid warfare is to destabilize countries by finding vulnerabilities, whether it's ethnic divisions, whether it's it could be political instability, whatever you can find, and you amplify those voices and you create wedge issues. There may already exist, but you amplify and destabilize these countries internally. So that's a big part of their strategy. Shifting to China, and we'll get back to Russia a little bit. Shifting to China, I do a talk called Sun Tzu and the Art of Cyberwar. Have any of you read Sun Tzu's Art of War? Right, okay. It actually does inform Chinese Communist strategic thinking. It is required reading for every one of their officers in the military. The idea, all warfare is deception, right? Know your enemy as you know yourself. Avoid what is strong, attack what is weak. So those are the basic tenets, and there's quite a few others, how you amplify those. But the whole question of deception is that the Chinese, as you know right now, they're going through an incredible military buildup. Something the likes we haven't seen. They build the equivalent of the British Navy every 3 years. The entire British Navy every 3 years. They have gone from having about a third of the capital ships of the United States 10 years ago to having about a third more capital ships than the United States. The only thing they don't do is they don't build aircraft carriers. We still have more tonnage in shipping because we have these big aircraft carriers. But they are also right now, they've laid the keel and they're building what they call a through-deck carrier, which will be about the size of a Nimitz class carrier. So they're competing with us in they have 2 stealth aircraft. One of them is a carbon copy, literally a carbon copy of the F-35. I'm glad they got that one and not the F-22, but that's a whole different talk. But, and they essentially exfiltrated data. While Lockheed was building the F-35, they found a contractor, they hacked his computer, and they exfiltrated data, about a terabyte worth of data, and everything from avionics to radar and things like that. And so they built this plane. Now, the F-35 cost us about $1.7 trillion in development. There's still some. And it took mainly about 17 years. Theirs from theft to first flying prototype was 3 years. Right. The only thing they can't do is they can't replicate the engines. So it's 2 engines instead of single engine. But anyway, that just shows that they are very aggressive in the use of cyber warfare capabilities. They focus on intellectual property theft, particularly advanced technology, and they have an all-sector approach. They go after everything. One of the things you hear a lot of about the Chinese is they're trying to erase what they call the century of shame. Because in the 19th century, Western powers kind of carved up China. They carved up little pieces of China. And the Chinese attribute that to the technological advance and technological dominance of the Western powers. How could Britain take Hong Kong and these different cantonments that were all along the coast of China, including we had a piece too. The Chinese felt that the only way that they could preserve is to become dominant technologically. And the quickest way to do that, rather than R&D, is to steal the information. And we have so much information, and it's not really that hard to get. So what is this? Why? My own contention is that it's preparing the battlefield. So for the Russians, cyber operations fill the traditional role of PSYOPs. You guys are familiar with or psychological operation, sabotage, things like that. They use a lot of cyber mercenaries and proxies. So the SolarWinds attack was launched from servers in the United States. Because anybody can buy server space, right? You go to a data center, you tell them you want to buy space, you get space. Then you put your destructive malware there, and you start doing your reconnaissance on your intended target. Once you find your intended target, much of what reconnaissance software does, and it's sitting all over, we've got this stuff, and we find it, we remove it, and more, we find more. What it does is it maps your operating system and all your protocols to find vulnerabilities. And some of these vulnerabilities go beyond what the intelligence services of these countries are doing. A lot of just cyber bad guys out there, right? They go to the dark web and they post it and they sell this thing. They have malware as service. You know, you can go on the dark web and say, for however much you want to pay them, and say, well, I'm working in this company and they run this operating system. They got, and I'd like to be able to hack into the personnel records or into financial records, or better yet, I'd like to see who their clients are. Look at maybe some bid data from contracts and all that. And I'll pay you, you give me the stuff, and I'll go work for the competitor. A lot of that kind of stuff happens. But on the military side, or on the side of national, dealing with national intelligence services and all that, what we found from SolarWinds is we think they were their persistence on that market, those databases, the dwell time may have been as much as 18 months. So they're kind of hanging out watching the traffic for about 18 months. So cyber operations can weaken core infrastructure of a nation state. And this is the most important part. They do this without risk of retaliation because attribution is very difficult and they have plausible deniability. So did you all remember, it was about a year or so ago, Russia unplugged from the internet. Remember you heard about that? They unplugged from the internet?
Yes.
So they unplugged from the internet. What does that mean? Right? Looking back at it now, and I've noticed that more and more Russia has moved its attack posture outside of Russia proper, and they have teams that they have in Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and Asia and Africa that launch attacks, and they buy server spaces in other countries because they want the capability of disconnecting from the internet when the retaliation comes from the United States. So this is essentially, they want to be able to attack and not have their own assets directly vulnerable to a counterstrike. May not work because depending on who you read, you talk to, again, open source, we're as persistent on their networks as they are on ours, if not more so. So again, this is superpower slugging it out. So real quick about the tier 2 powers like Iran and North Korea, Israel. Right now there's a cyber war going on between Israel and Iran that's going back and forth. Israel is a lot more sophisticated. It attacks large infrastructure, it attacked the gasoline distribution systems, attacked port facilities. The Iranians have tried, but they have been fairly unsuccessful because the Israelis hardened their system. So what did they go after? They went after dating sites because dating sites aren't hardened. And what they did is they go on the dating sites. They created these avatars, these fake people, to try to get embarrassing information, and then they start releasing that information. And so what does that do? It creates dissension. Because some of these folks were dating people they probably shouldn't have been dating. If their families found out, and maybe telling embarrassing things about themselves, because people let their guard down when they're on social media with someone they think they can trust or someone they're trying to create a relationship with, right? So the Iranians were able to pivot to using, again, attack what is weak, because they found that when they went after the Israeli defense or research and development, all that, these are hardened facilities, they have really good monitoring, intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, and they weren't very successful. So they found the low-hanging fruit. So what does this mean economically? And then I'm going to open it up for questions. I could talk on this stuff, So the economic losses, there's groups out there that are looking at the global impact with respect to our economies. And right now, we're all taking a hit, right? COVID has hurt supply chain, distribution, inflation. This is not a good time for the economy. But even while all this going, we're probably seeing more ransomware attacks than we've ever seen. And some of that is state-sponsored, but a lot of it isn't. A lot of it is what I call cyber mercenaries. What does that mean? Well, in Russia, they don't really pay their cyber warriors a lot of money, right? They're intelligence people and all. So they let them freelance, as long as they don't attack Russian targets or targets of interest to Russia. They let them freelance by being cyber crooks on the side and doing ransomware attacks and getting money. So it's an income stream for those guys. North Korea basically uses attacks against the global financial. They've become very good at stealing cryptocurrency wallets, of infiltrating cryptocurrency wallets. Hundreds of millions of dollars in financial theft from North Korea. Why does North Korea do that? Because they don't have any other way of making money. They are locked out of the global economic system. So it's a revenue stream for Kim Jong-un. So losses to the global economy are estimated at about $1 trillion right now. But if you look at the trend lines, the estimates is that by 2025, the losses will accumulate to 10.5 trillion globally. And a lot of people are saying this just isn't sustainable. That we're going to push the global economy into some form of depression, because essentially what happens, for those of you who've been hacked, you don't have to raise your hand. And if it was through a third-party contractor, like, remember Home Depot had the thing where, if you use your credit card, that went away. Me, OPM. But any of these applications that you use online, and you get your data compromised, either for identity theft or your credit cards or whatever. In fact, there's so many credit cards available on the dark web that there's more credit cards available than there are people to buy them, so the market completely collapsed. So you can get credit cards for almost nothing on the dark web because there's greater supply than demand. They follow market forces too. So what happens is we lose trust in these systems. We lose confidence in these systems. The other thing that's happening, Houston's a big center for this, is what they call business email compromise. Phishing attacks. So bad guy puts reconnaissance on your business. They figure out who you're doing, who your clients are, who your trusted partners are. Maybe you've got a joint venture with another company. So what they do then is they craft an email for procurement or something. So by the way, we're buying this product, or you've talked to so and so. We're going to go ahead and purchase this item, or we're going to sell you the item that you wanted. Send the money here, and it'll be to a site that is run by the cyber criminals. So I don't want to leave you, before we get into the Q&A, I don't want to leave you with the thought that we're not doing anything and we're constantly on the losing end. We are not. We've had a couple of really big successes. We over the past year or so, about 60 of these guys have been arrested and extradited to the United States from all over the world. Then there was a case of a cyber criminal gang, a Russian one called REVIL, capital R-E-V-I-L, and they reported to be, and we do good attribution. There's digital fingerprints when you do forensics, and you kind of figure out who these guys are. They use certain TTP techniques, and procedures. And there's certain pieces of code that they often use over and over and over again. And sometimes these cyber criminal gangs have terrible operational security because they're only hacking out and they don't think anybody's hacking in. So a lot of times we catch these guys and then we monitor them and we figure out who they're working with. So we believe that this Russian criminal gang working as a proxy for state, for the Russian, we believe it was the SVR, which is one of Russia's three security services, FSB, GRU, it's military, and SVR. I can do a whole talk on those guys. But this cyber criminal gang was working as a proxy for them, so they were involved in the supply chain attack on Colonial Pipeline. But anyway, we were able to trace some of that back. So the FBI, NSA, U.S. Cyber Command decided to launch an operation. DHS was involved, Secret Service. I mean, it was all a government. This is how we respond now. It's an all-government thing, and if we need to bring capability in from the military and intelligence services, that capability is brought in. This is how seriously we're taking this. So what they did is they hacked back. They launched an operation. They obtained the decryption key for the ransomware. So they're able to decrypt some of the stuff and and as you probably heard the FBI saying they were able to recover some of the money, right? But that wasn't all we did. We started we took them offline, we infected their servers, and we started doing a dump of data wiping software on their hardware. So we started to dismantle their database. Not only that, but our malware got into their backups. So when they tried to back up their database, because they found that their backups were corrupted. So REvil announced to the world they were going offline. And they made a general call to all the other ransomware gangs out there to stop the U.S. what they call bandit mugging. And I'm saying, I'm going to get a bandit mugger t-shirt. I like bandit mugging. So they called for everybody to focus their attacks on the U.S. Public sector infrastructure. And a lot of the other cyber gangs are like, are you kidding? And get them ticked off? Look what they did to you. We're not going down that road. You guys are on your own. So that's one of the successes, and we've had some other successes. So I didn't want to give you that we're just kind of getting knocked around. We're catching more of these guys. We're doing more joint operations with law enforcement in Interpol. I've been really impressed with the Dutch security services and law enforcement. They took down a major smuggling ring inside Europe. So much so that what they did is they set up some proxy servers. They did what's called a Pseudoops. So they created a fake bad guy organization, and they said, well, we can smuggle your goods better than these guys. So, why don't you park your stuff in our warehouses? And those warehouses were run by the Dutch police, and then they got everything with a hammer. Yeah, it's a sting operation, massive sting operations. They took down about 20 or 30 of these guys and dismantled several of these groups. So there's a lot going on with law enforcement. Yes, question?
Thank you for a beautiful presentation. Well, do we have a cybernetic czar? It's NSA or how do we call it?
Okay, so this is the really great thing. So I was reading just yesterday that there is a working group that reports to the president. There's a White House working group. But as I said, we've made the decision that we're going to do an all-of-government approach. So we will bring in U.S. Cyber Command, the capabilities of U.S. Cyber Command. FBI gets involved, DHS, NSA, CIA, any government agency that can assist with thwarting these types of attacks. we're going to use those capabilities. For a long time, we would sit on these capabilities. We had enormous capabilities. Like, well, I don't know. This is not a military operation, so DOD wouldn't get over. We'll just keep it in the law enforcement space, right? So that's FBI, DHS, and on. Now they're saying, no, we're going to bring the best capability to bear when we need to. And we're going to start what they call defend forward. So this is the Pentagon issued a policy on this. What defend forward means is that we will do reconnaissance through national and technical means. And if we believe that the evidence points to the beginning of an offensive cyber operation by anybody, we will attack them first and disrupt their networks. And if that means wiping their hard drive, if that means data exfiltration, whatever sting operations, whatever it takes, so we're moving more to an offensive posture. And there's always a risk when you do that. What do you think the risk is?
World opinion.
World opinion is one.
Just a counterattack.
Counterattack, but the other thing is cyber. When you launch a cyber attack, it's not like dropping a bomb that destroys itself and pieces go everywhere. Often that code that is used. Now, some cyber weapons are designed to dismantle themselves after certain. Stuxnet was supposed to do that, but it didn't. It was discovered, and it wasn't discovered by the Iranians. It was discovered by Western cybersecurity firms that were looking at this thing and saying, "What's going on here?" But that's a whole different talk, because the SCADA systems, supervisory control and data acquisition systems that were running the centrifuges, were a Siemens product. So Siemens was getting a lot of heat from the Iranians, like, your product is defective because it's blowing up all our centrifuges. So Siemens had some people look at it. Symantec was part of it, and some German cyber digital forensic specialists and cyber researchers, and they're the ones that discovered Stuxnet, not the Iranians. But yeah, any other questions? Yes.
So, the title of your talk is how cybersecurity is going to impact foreign policy.
Right.
And all of this is more or less nefarious behavior.
Right.
And you've got the other two that don't have any rules, and then we try to have ethics. It seems like we're really on horns of a dilemma ethically on what, so we used to do all this in secret, we don't tell our public, and, but it's in their best interest. We know best. I mean, that's kind of...
No, I'm glad you brought that up. In my zeal, I almost forgot something. So, there is a global conversation going on within the United Nations. There is a thing called the Internet Governance Forum. And I would commend it to you. Go online, UNIGF. It's a broad conversation involving governments, civil society. The University of St. Thomas is going to join this conversation. We have pledged to be part of what's called the Paris Call. And what is that? There was a meeting in Paris in 2018 of a multi-stakeholder meeting. And see, the Internet Governance Forum reports to the Secretary General of the United Nations, but there are UNESCO's involved, there are other UN-affiliated agencies. But because of the impact, remember I talked to you about that business impact? The business community. Countries are looking, they're saying, wait a minute, we're all collateral damage. The global economy can be pushed into a deep depression if something's not done. So there's an ongoing, very robust conversation. Right now, the Internet Governance Forum is meeting in Katowice, Poland. They have an annual meeting. In the Paris meeting in 2018, the country signed on to the following list. There are 9 principles. Now, these are very broadly worded because you know how it is when you do with the UN. You've got 192 countries and you can't say anything that's going to get... I mean, we're trying to reach consensus. But everybody recognizes how important the digital ecosystem is to global peace and stability and to global economic stability. Everybody recognizes that. So one, protect individuals and infrastructure. That's principle one. Principle two, protect the internet. Principle three, defend electoral processes. Defend intellectual property is principle number 4. This is a big one. Principle 5, non-proliferation of malicious software and practices. So this idea which there are people out there who all they do is they build bugs. And then they put them on the dark web and they sell them. And they advertise what the bug will do, and sometimes they'll do a little attack and say, see what my bug is. It's designed to attack the iOS, the Apple operating system, whatever. So the idea is non-proliferation of that. Strengthening digital lifecycle security. Support cyber hygiene. Right? That's stuff that we all do with our systems. We get rid of, some people. You can buy tools to do this. It cleans off your cache. It'll get rid of cookies. That's cyber hygiene. No private hackback. Now this is interesting. What happened during this meeting? There was a lot of concern that companies and countries that don't have real well-developed infrastructure would hire cyber mercenaries to hack other countries. And it's like, no, we don't want to go down that road. So we don't want the private actors involved in cyber espionage, right? So that's a principle. And the principle number 9, acceptance of international norms for the responsible use of the internet. And then there's a whole list of norms. The idea is this is an aspirational document. It's a document of intent, but what I see, and one of the reasons that we at University of St. Thomas, because our program, our Global Cybersecurity program, its basic foundations is in ethics and governance. That's why we're going to join this conversation. And so you work with technologists, you work with legal experts, you work with people who are in business, you work with civil society groups. We're all working together, and the idea is that there will be sort of a crescendo of support, just like that we have in nuclear arms control. Yes, there's been proliferation of nuclear weapons, but the arms control framework for nuclear weapons is kind of threadbare right now, but we've had it. We do have the prohibition on chemical and biological weapons, and those have mainly held for the most part. Syria, we had some problems there. So the idea is that, and this is why I say, while we work on technical solutions, there's this other side, this geopolitical side that's in diplomacy, and we work both tracks, because I think that's the only way we're going to at least mitigate this problem enough so that it doesn't present an existential threat to the global economy. Because that's where I believe we're headed if we don't get some sort of control over this. At least tamp it back a little bit and increase law enforcement to get these bad boys out there, right? So, I've talked a lot. I'm really interested in hearing what you think and your questions.
We have an awful lot of IP, so I brought in a gentleman who's been here 17 years from India. He just became a U.S. citizen in August. He brings people in from India that he trusts. We also found Dakota State University is an awesome hotbed. That's all they teach is cybersecurity. Right. Are there any other universities like that?
Oh gosh, yeah. Carnegie Mellon has been doing this forever. They were one of the first organizations outside of the government when the internet was first. It was a DARPA project, right? And so they were one of the first to develop. MIT has a really good cyber security. Caltech, Georgia Tech is amazing.
Are they tied to like NSA?
Oh yeah.
Okay, good.
So there's an NSA framework for education. You can get certified. University of Houston recently got certified as a center of excellence for cybersecurity. So there are a lot of good universities that are working the technical side. There's virtually no one working the policy side except us. I mean, here in Texas. Now, there are other universities that are looking at Loyola in Chicago is working on the more governance side. I've got a friend of mine at Boston College. He's still technical, but they're going to be doing more work on the governance side and on the policy side. But we're focused on the policy side.
I just want to take the IP.
Okay, I know. But it's all part of the framework. We have to build trust into the system. You know, if I had more time, I'd talk about architecture, but that's a whole nother talk. Yes?
So we're just going to take one last question right here, and then after that, I'll come to close.
Okay.
Just a quick thing. I mean, I get the idea of why you're doing policy, but the problem with cybersecurity is that it's unlike war. I mean, your average person can't buy a tank. Your average person can't buy an airplane. Your average person can hack.
Right.
So, among countries, the agreement is good, but how can policy protect us from mercenaries? How can policy protect us from the Russian government under the table paying mercenaries from attackers?
Right. So remember I said we're working there's a technical track and a policy track. On a technical track, we're looking at using AI. We monitor a lot more traffic and know what the traffic is. One of the problems we've had in this country is that it's almost impossible for us to mandate security standards. Business has not wanted the federal government to mandate security standards that are, across the enterprise. So what we are relying on is businesses adopting best practices, some of us in this framework, and working with private cybersecurity firms to harden their system. Now we've got an all-of-government approach with our intelligence services and the military that are going after some of these guys. What the policy side does for you is that, for instance, even where there is conflict between tier one powers, for instance, I'll just say NATO and Russia, there's still an agreement between NATO and Russia to exchange observers for military operations, for large exercises. Oh, Russia's cheap by saying there's not as many guys and all that. But we have rules of engagement about aircraft and ships at sea. So there's a lot of things on the policy side we can do. More and more, our law enforcement and Interpol and law enforcement agencies like the Carabinieri in Italy and the British GCHQ, which is their intelligence, signals intelligence, are all working together, the Five Eyes. So we're seeing countries come together. Smaller countries are wanting to sign on because they want a big brother to protect them, right? Because, everybody's in this space. So I think that you're going to see more effort in that area. And when some of these websites go down, some of these ransomware sites go down, when some of these guys get arrested, there was one Russian hacker, a judge gave him 60 years. 60 years. And he said, this business of slap on the hands, you guys go work as pen testers after a year or two, the judge said, I'm giving hard time for these guys. So as their costs go up, you're going to see some of these guys decide, and there's been several ransomware groups that said, we're cashing out, we're leaving. We're not going to do this anymore. It's getting too dangerous. It's getting too hot. We made enough money. We'll go, buy our Lamborghini or whatever and head off into the sunset. So.
I know our time is up, but why couldn't we have done something before the elections, the last elections?
We did.
Yeah.
that was one of the reasons I believe Christopher Krebs was fired. But that's another story.
Well,
thank
you guys so much for coming out. For all the new faces I haven't met, my name is Tatiana. I'm one of the program coordinators for the World Affairs Council of Greater Houston. Once again, thank you guys for coming out to all of our events in West Houston. Thank you, Eric, for coming out and speaking to us about the geopolitics of cybersecurity. I'm not going to speak for you. Maybe you'll stay a little bit after, maybe not. For any of our future events, including those that will be back here in 2022 for, check out our website, wachouston.org. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you guys next year. Enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you, guys.